Hi guys, this is Vic from Plate.to.paper and welcome back to another watercolor art tutorial. Today we'll be painting a very cute lion ice cream cone, and this exercise and the materials come from the second edition watercolor art kit I released with Mossery, focusing on Japanese desserts. I've linked it in the description, but even if you don't have it, feel free to follow along with your own materials. Let's start by going through the color mixes. First, the ice cream base, which is a mix of lemon yellow and permanent yellow. We'll be shading the area with a mix of permanent yellow and yellow ochre. Next, the popcorn. We're aiming for orange here. I've used permanent yellow and opera pink, but you can use yellow and red as well. We'll need some darker variations, which we'll mix by adding burnt sienna and permanent yellow to the orange. For the darkest parts, we can just use burnt sienna. For the biscuits, I'm mixing white and yellow ochre. Do the first layer with a lighter wash of this mix. You can add a bit of yellow ochre for the shading. For the waffle cone, I'm starting with yellow ochre and just a touch of burnt sienna. For shading, use the same mix but with a higher proportion of burnt sienna. For the chocolate bits, I'm using burnt sienna and neutral tint. Add more neutral tint for subsequent layers. For the mouth, we're using a mix of white and opera pink, but you can just use pink as well. Lastly, for the paper cone, I'm mixing lemon yellow and viridian green for the base. For the darker mix, I've added a bit more green and a touch of burnt sienna. The clovers can be done in just viridian, but I've added a little bit of lemon yellow here. The color mixes are done, so let's start painting. First, we'll use the pink pencil to draw out the details we'll work on later. Here, the clovers for the paper cone. And here, the cracks in the caramelized popcorn. The tricky part here is to keep things random and varied, so allow your pencil to move freely. It also helps to look up some reference photos if you need to. Once we've mixed up our first ice cream base yellow, we'll apply a very light wash of it to the area, being careful to avoid the other parts. Usually I would start with just clean water, but having just a little bit of paint makes it easier to see where we've applied the wash. Now we'll take a more concentrated mix and apply it. So having applied the previous light wash allows for the color to spread evenly at this point. The scoop of ice cream is round, so I'm leaving the bottom darker. While the area is still wet, we can apply a more concentrated mix of permanent yellow and a bit of ochre into the bottom half, but also in the nooks and crannies under the nose and ears. Here we have our first cone layer. I'm applying a mix of yellow ochre and burnt sienna directly into the area. I apply another darker layer where the shadow of the popcorn is being cast. Now we have to check that the ice cream layer has dried sufficiently. Then we'll use the mix of white and ochre to fill in the areas around the nose and ears. After the cone layer has dried enough, we apply the first layer of viridian green and lemon yellow mix. I'm painting around the clovers, but don't worry if you end up painting into the lines, as we'll work on them later. Now we'll start with the first popcorn layer. This will be the first out of 4, but you can cut one down by starting out with more concentrated color. Use the pencil lines as a guide and start filling in the shapes. You can leave some spots unpainted if you want to use them as highlights later. For the mouth, I'm using the mix of white and opera pink. For the chocolate bits, we'll apply a dark brown mix. You can definitely go darker here if you want. I'd advise dabbing off any extra liquid off your brush when working on these small parts. Now the initial colors are complete, we can start developing the values and textures. I'm using a bit of yellow ochre here to shade the inside of the ears. Here I'm using the same color and adding just a bit of roundness to the biscuits. I add a bit of burnt sienna to the yellow ochre, and we start the second layer of the waffle cone, the parts inside the grid. You can see I'm picking up paint with my brush from the first section and using the paint from that on subsequent parts. Now I'm adding some dimension to the protruding grid lines. And I'm going over the ears, cheeks and mouth one more time. After checking that the first layer of the paper cone is dry, I'm applying the darker green mix. Again, don't worry if you end up painting into the lines. It's better that you paint into the lines than out of them. Now I'm using the pink pencil to give some additional definition to the piece. You'll see me using the pink pencil very often because this gives a line that registers more like color compared to that of a black graphite pencil, which really registers as a line. Now we'll work on the second layer of the popcorn using the darker orange mix. You'll notice that I'm not merely going over everything I painted before, but I'm thinking about emphasizing the individual planes and surfaces of each piece. Back to the ice cream base, I'm using the mix of permanent yellow and ochre and darkening the areas that meet the popcorn or are receiving shadows from the biscuits. I'm also creating some additional texture here since it's not a completely smooth surface. Now I'm deepening the colors in the facial details. Personally, while I'm painting, I do like to take my time to develop the values, but you can certainly make things faster by going in darker in the initial stages. Another round of working the popcorn. At this point, I'm brushing in strokes and lines to emphasize the cracks. Working more on the waffle cone, I'm taking into consideration how to show the thickness of the waffle pattern. It's always good to refer to reference photos to study how light affects these structures. Now we're adding the clovers to the paper cone, and you can see that I'm using more Viridian green here than I did in the colour mixing section. I've switched to a smaller brush to apply the darker and smaller details to the popcorn, and I'm also using a darker and thicker mix of paint. The popcorn is a rough and jagged circular shape, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to bring out the texture and structure of these pieces. From here, I'm adding coloured lines to all the various sections. One important thing you'll notice is that I'm not applying just solid lines of the same colour. I break up the lines and use slight variations in colour when doing this. Solid, consistent lines will end up making the final piece look flat. I'm using the pink pencil again to further define the shapes. You can see it looks more like a variation in colour rather than an outline. For some highlights, I've applied a thick dot of Chinese white to the chocolate. We're almost done, just some final details left. I've always found it's in the last 10% where the piece can really shine and reach its full potential. And that's it, we've completed our lion ice cream cone. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and let me know in the comments if you found it useful or if you want to see something specific in a future video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!